Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today with a video on a topic that's definitely been floating around since the news about Xbox acquiring Activision had arisen, and that's about, is Xbox a monopoly? And I'm no legal expert, I'm no antitrust expert, I'm not going to pretend to be one, although I do have my own opinions that I'll definitely share in this video. But I wanted to bring on a good friend of mine, Rick Hoeg, to talk about the legality of this deal. Rick, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing okay. It's been an absolute crazy amount of news in the last 24 hours. So there's about 6,000 angles to look at this thing from. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. And Rick, for those who aren't familiar with you, where can they find you? But also, what do you do that really legitimizes you, I'd say, in this conversation?
Well, I have a law degree, which often legitimizes me in certain circles, even when it's not appropriate. But I also run a YouTube channel, the Hoeg Law YouTube channel, that has a show called Virtual Legality that talks primarily about the business and law of video games, technology, software, and more. So we've been around for about 3 years now. We're in episode 600 or so, and we've been talking a lot about antitrust and acquisitions and Microsoft, going all the way back to when I started talking about this on the internet with folks like the Easy Allies and others.
Right. So for those who have not seen Rick's channel, please do check it out. Link in the description down below. But as you can see, our man is trained in the legal field. So I felt like picking his brain a bit on this acquisition and the hot topic, which is like, hey, is Xbox becoming a monopoly? He would be best suited for that. So let's really get into that conversation. If you're new here, consider subscribing as well. Rick, I just want to ask you the simple question. Is Xbox now a monopoly in the gaming space?
So you say that's a simple question, but the nature of antitrust, the nature of antitrust regulation is always going to be premised around what the market is, right? Is Xbox or Microsoft a monopolist provider of gaming? I don't think any reasonable person on earth could say that when you think about the mobile fields as well as the PC fields and everything else that exists in the sphere of gaming. But that's not how we usually think about the question, right? We see them spend $70 billion to buy core gaming companies, right? A publisher of Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, big time stuff. And people say, well, okay, there used to be 3 huge independent publishers and now there'll be 2. Or depending on how you frame that, I usually think of Ubisoft, EA, and Activision as the big timers. Maybe you really love Square Enix. I'm not trying to impugn anybody on that particular score. But there are fewer publishers after this deal closes than there were before it closed, right? And so you could argue that that is some amount of lessened competition in the video gaming industry. But for the most part, it's not at a gaming level what we would look at and usually say is something that regulators would be concerned about. Right? We saw Disney buy up every company on earth, and the regulators barely batted an eye. But I do want to say that definition of market is where that question lives. Right? I like to tell folks in Virtual Legality, if you make a narrow enough definition of a market, anybody's a monopolist. Right? You, Matty, you're a monopolist provider of your videos. You're the only one doing it. And so if you make the market Matty videos, hey, anything you do could be a restraint of trade or a monopoly action in that specific market. Now, we, as lawyers and as antitrust law has proceeded through precedent, try to make clear that we don't want the markets that narrow because that's stupid. And so gaming is where Microsoft would point you if a regulator were to ask. And here in the United States, that's the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice. But we also know that those 2 agencies have been rattling the saber about technology companies, right? We are in the midst.
I've been reading about that lately.
Of the FTC trying to unwind the Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp acquisitions, right? We're in the midst of lawsuits about those things right now. And so when you look at this, is it a gaming question? Okay, that's pretty easy to say Microsoft doesn't have a problem. Is it instead a tech question? Are we looking at a situation where a regulator that wants to do something could say, well, Game Pass is a subscription service. That's really software as a service. You have a monopoly on certain aspects of cloud gaming and server infrastructure. If you combine those with a content push, are we talking about not just a horizontal question, but a vertical question? And if I want to make hay at the Department of Justice and I'm looking for a promotion, do I do it with this $70 billion deal? So I do think there are statements out there online that say there's a 0% chance the government does anything about this. And I think those are wrong. I think any lawyer would tell you right now, in the current administration, with what we're seeing from the FTC and the DOJ, it is not impossible for one or both of those agencies to decide that this would be a good place to plant a flag. Do I think that's likely? I don't. I think Microsoft is probably okay, at least in the US. I think other jurisdictions present other questions. I'm not a lawyer in those jurisdictions, but they can be more aggressive. But as for right now, I think if you're hearing somebody say it is definitely an antitrust problem or it's definitely not, that both of those positions are wrong.
Right. Very well said, and very informative at that, because I wrote down a couple of remaining independents like Bungie, Capcom, Ubisoft, EA, Square Enix, Focus Home, Bandai, Sega, THQ Nordic, CD Projekt Red, just to name a few. There are certainly others on the list. And so, you see that there's still a lot that remains on the board. Obviously, some of these have been acquisition candidates. I remember Ubisoft was heavily in the conversation.
Ubisoft they attempted a hostile takeover of Ubisoft.
Right, with Vivendi.
So that's a little bit different, but very much part of the same kind of conversation.
Right, and so there's a lot that does remain, which brings me to my next question for you, Hoeg, is does another publisher, let's say, I guess we can't say for sure, I don't expect this because no one expected this, let alone something else.
It's a wild week.
Does another publisher come into Xbox's fold within the next year or two, does that bring them possibly to this level? If we're already seeing some side eyes, I was doing some reading on, just general people who weren't even involved in gaming saying like, oh, there might be some involvement here at the FTC. Do you think that another publisher will bring it to that level if Xbox were to say absorb Ubisoft where, okay, now we need some type of federal involvement?
Well, it's all optics, right? I mean, if we're still talking about market concentration, even if Microsoft bought Ubisoft and Activision, you're not actually talking about numbers in terms of percentage of market concentration that would usually trip all the alarm bells. But we're talking about big numbers, and we're talking more specifically, even outside of gaming, all of these questions that we can talk about as if we're antitrust lawyers and we're looking at it as if we're sitting in the FTC or the DOJ. The other component of this is that it's Microsoft. Microsoft is worth $2 trillion. Regardless of how you feel about the rest of anything, we don't need to limit the conversation to gaming. The Department of Justice has already had run-ins with Microsoft. The government has dealings with this particular juggernaut of a company. So even if you want to say, well, we're the third highest revenue in video games, we're not actually increasing our market concentration in that market so big, it's not fair to just talk about Game Pass, all these other things that Microsoft will argue, and probably successfully, you still have the problem of, hey, they're a big giant tech company. We just had Congress talk about the problems with big giant tech companies. We have constant discussions in either the Senate or the House of Representatives or these other agencies about what to do about Facebook or Twitter or Twitch or whomever, and consolidation in those industries. So you're still going to be talking about a company that's got $2 trillion, has money to buy these companies on all cash bases, which is incredible. Right? Nobody is buying these companies for all cash except these juggernauts. And to say, I don't think that's right. And the antitrust laws in the United States are amorphous enough. They are ambiguous enough to say, hey, if you don't think it's right, you're going to be able to craft an argument to cause some trouble for a deal. So there's a whole melange of kind of ingredients that go in here to just say, all they have to tell Microsoft and Activision or anybody else is, we think that you substantially lessen competition, and that's predictive in and of itself. That's the nature of the antitrust laws. So if you do get on the wrong side of an agency that doesn't like you for any number of reasons, and one of those could be, hey, we're in the midst of buying a $70 billion company and we toss on another $35 billion, then you're asking for trouble. So will Microsoft buy anything while this is pending? I would say no, because there is a risk of jeopardizing really both if you were to have two transactions there, because you start to increase the chances that somebody somewhere says this is too much. And that's the real politic. No lawyer anywhere can promise you that nothing will happen on this or that something will, because the laws in antitrust land are so based on what a regulator is looking at and what they think of this kind of thing. So $70 billion is getting those kinds of comments that you mentioned because it raises eyebrows. It's a lot of money, and it's certainly a lot of money for this industry, which has never seen anything like it. And so could somebody step in? Absolutely. Will they? I think Microsoft has the better part of the argument, but that doesn't mean anything if you get a regulator that's motivated to make hay.
Right. That's interesting. So I wasn't aware. This is kind of, as you mentioned, like very optics driven, almost interpretation driven. Like, oh, I find a problem with this. We're going to do something about it and get involved. So that very well is possible, but especially when you see a leap in the gaming space from something like, I would say, Zynga and their, rather Take-Two's acquisition of Zynga, which was $13 billion. That was already like an eyebrow raiser for a lot.
This week. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And then this week comes and we see an almost $50 billion jump, which is no small number. So I could see why it's turning heads outside of the games industry, looking in, saying, what is happening here? You know, of course, it calls to the growth of gaming and just how much money can be made through it. So obviously with that, it kind of answers one of my other questions, which is, you know, let's say they brought in a developer. Does that also jeopardize it? Because obviously you're bringing these major publishers that have access to this wealth of IP, this wealth of games. Is there a differentiator for you real quick when it comes to, let's say there have been rumors about Avalanche, IO Interactive. Let's say they roll one of them in for $5-10 million. I don't know what they'd actually be worth. It's so hard to predict now, these prices. Yeah, it's so hard to predict their prices at this point in time now, because, you know, what's happening is, real quick, you're seeing these news sites round up the numbers for, say, the Activision acquisition, where they're like, oh, it's $70 billion. I'm like, you realize it's like that $2.5 billion is worth more than most companies out there, and like you're just rounding it up casually. Like, that's how big the numbers are getting here. But back to my question. Do you see a difference there if it was a developer acquisition of a much cheaper amount, I would imagine, versus something like a publisher acquisition? Does that still turn heads in your opinion?
Well, all of these questions really relate to kind of market concentration, which is only one way that you can look at this. And so the bigger that your acquisition is, presumably the bigger portion of the market you're buying. And if it's a smaller amount, it's more easily explained. So if you spend $70 billion, you're taking out one of these big publishers, your market concentration, we're just pulling numbers out of the air, goes up 8% or 10%. If you just buy a developer, your market concentration isn't going to go up really at all in most circumstances. So there's no problems with EA buying Respawn. There's no problems with Sony buying Insomniac. It's when Microsoft starts saying, hey, how about all of ZeniMax? How about all of Activision? Where you start to go, okay, well, that's a lot of companies all at once. And you have the conversation. So I do think there's a difference in size there, but remembering that market concentration isn't the be-all, end-all of a determination of whether or not the FTC or the DOJ steps in.
Sure. I mean, that brings me to one of my last questions here, because you talked a lot about optics on the side of the DOJ, the FTC, like getting involved here. Yeah. Is there an optics front that matters on, I'd say, Microsoft's level? Like, what we've read so far, Jeff Grubb just put out a great report, is that Activision approached Microsoft in November. So this deal came together extremely quick, right?
Which I think it's important to note is the opposite of what the Wall Street Journal reported last night. So I don't want to, there's no buses being thrown in under here. I'm on the outside, but I just read that Wall Street Journal article, and then I just read that GameSpeed article, and I'm like, well, those are diametrically opposed positions as to who approached who.
And then Phil said it came together late last year. So, you know, what's the true story here? But regardless, it seems like it came together somewhat recently, and it looks like this was a deal sort of fell into Xbox's lap, where they're like, well, you're offering us, in this case, like the biggest FPS IP, you're offering us a ton of dead IP and studios that we can make use of. Like, okay, why not? Does intention on the side of, say, Microsoft matter in this case at all, or is it just the deed that's been done? Like, they didn't acquire Activision to be monopolistic if they approached them so ready to sell. Does any of that factor in?
I don't think so. In all honesty, the approach vectors there, which regardless of whatever side it happened on, aren't going to change the analysis of what the deal does. Objectively, those agencies, the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission, are supposed to look at a deal and say, does this hurt competition? Just in terms of how it operates. And yes, that can involve going into emails and figuring out, oh, it was the intent here to lock out Sony and jack up the price of Game Pass, and is there a paper trail? That kind of stuff could happen. It's happened to other companies. I doubt it here. But overall, it's okay. Microsoft is a player in these markets. They spend $70 billion. Now they have this market allocation. What can they do? When they buy this, is it easier for them to increase the price of Game Pass? Is it easier for them to hold back on releasing games in a way that harms consumers because they now have to manage, okay, we've got Halo. We don't want to release it next to Call of Duty. We don't want to release it next to the next Fallout. Is this changing the market in a way that we should step in as government regulators? Regardless of how that happened, it shouldn't matter that much to that kind of equation. They're just evaluating it, again, predictively on what they think would happen and figuring out whether or not they think that there's a problem. That said, I think with the competing articles and statements all over the place, if anything, Microsoft commenting on Activision Blizzard's situation during that period of November, December, and January probably looks worse than them not saying anything at all if we're just looking at that kind of equitable, hey, how does Microsoft look optically? I did a video in Virtual Legality today, I have to tell you, that's called Did Microsoft Play Dirty? Because there is a clear through line towards the last dive of the Activision Blizzard stock price and Phil Spencer's email to his employees leaking out that says we're going to do something about Activision Blizzard. So you start to unravel that and say, well, there's a clear incentive for Microsoft now that we know what was happening to keep that line as low as possible. Do other people step in? Is there an investor issue? That kind of thing. So I don't really think that that's definitive either direction. But optically, it's really going to rest on whether or not, from a political perspective, those two agencies want to make a move. And we've seen them issue press releases that says we want to be more aggressive about antitrust. We want to be more aggressive about protecting tech. And if I'm Microsoft, that's what I'm concerned about. And to make clear, when you're having these conversations before you sign a definitive document, your lawyers are telling you all this. You had a conversation with your antitrust guys that said, here's the situation, here's how FTC and DOJ are reacting right now, here's what we think is the potential for a problem, and you evaluate that, and as Microsoft did, you go forward. So it's not like they're not getting legal counsel on these things. It's just that no lawyer can guarantee what's in the mind of a given regulator at any given moment in time.
Sure. That's all the questions I had, Hoeg. I mean, this has been super informative and I think really can guide the community a little bit more on, what makes this a monopoly and what it is. And it seems to sort of fall in line with where I think a lot of us are, although there are a lot outraged and understandably so, because I think this deal does reach a bit further than, say, the Bethesda deal, which is, this isn't a monopoly, but we could see some potential legal intervention at some point in time. It's not impossible is really it, where with Bethesda, it seemed like, this is going to go through fine. There's nothing to really worry about.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? ZeniMax, I agree with you as to how this is being interpreted. ZeniMax probably has more IPs that I personally care about. So that was actually probably a bigger meteor strike for me to say, oh, well, okay, no Elder Scrolls, no Fallouts on Sony. That's interesting. And I haven't played Call of Duty in a while. Sorry. My brother used to make Call of Duty. He was at Activision for a long time. Apologies.
Right. But, I remember Cog mentioned that to me.
Yeah. He left. He went to Microsoft. So,
Oh. No way.
He left for ZeniMax last year. And I jokingly called him up this week and said, I guess you were going to Microsoft, hell or high water, my friend. So I haven't been as into those Activision intellectual properties as the ZeniMax ones. So it's interesting. Obviously, Call of Duty's at the top of the list for sales every year. So it's a big deal. But I think that this transaction is likely to go through. If someone were to ask me on the street, I would say it's more probably than not going to go through. It might have small changes made to it. These agencies, either in the EU or other jurisdictions, can ask for divestitures, can ask for things. Hey, we're okay with the deal, but you have to get rid of some aspect of the companies that you're buying. That kind of thing can happen, and it will be interesting to watch.
What kind of aspects would that be, by the way?
Well, I'm sorry?
What kind of aspect would that be, by the way?
Well, I mean, you can imagine, I don't know how much you followed things like Disney and Fox, but they had to divest themselves of specific news items and make sure that they didn't purchase too many cable news outlets in specific jurisdictions. So you could imagine a scenario where a jurisdiction says, this isn't okay with us. I mean, one of the big deals of this deal is the purchase of King, right? And that doesn't get talked a lot enough, in my opinion. But Candy Crush and King are absolute juggernauts. They're juggernauts for ABK right now. They're running the ship in terms of revenue generation. And Microsoft hasn't had a player in that space at the level of King. But King is a foreign jurisdiction. Somebody could step in and say, we have a problem with you buying King in this fashion. I cannot claim to be an expert at what any given EU regulatory body might do, and they tend to be more aggressive than the ones here in the United States. That might not be the case going forward, but they have been historically. So there are questions here. It is not a given, even though I think it's more likely than not going to go through as you saw it yesterday.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Hoeg, for your time. Again, for those who are interested in hearing more from you, learning more about the law side of gaming, where can they find you?
Absolutely. So I'm in two major places on social media. I'm tweeting all the time at Hoeglaw, Hoeglaw, commenting on all sorts of stuff. Certainly these kinds of stories and my Michigan Wolverines whenever they're playing. And I apologize in advance for that. but also prominently at youtube.com/HoegLaw, same spelling. Virtual legality, we are absolutely talking about this week. Had a big video yesterday about the actual price and the purchase process, as well as antitrust questions. And again, did a video today on whether or not Microsoft was playing fast and loose and whether or not they were taking advantage of Bobby Kotick's ego in convincing him to go along with this deal in the way that he did.
Right on. Well, please, everyone, check that out. It will be linked in the description down below. Great content creator, great guy, great friend. So please do support Hoeg. Hoeg, again, thank you so much for your time here on the channel. I do appreciate you lending your insight, as I think it helps really inform people on a wider basis. And with that, thank you again, everyone, for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next video. Stay sexy, stay active. Love you all. Peace.